I think what I like most is the feeling of the connection of the past and the present. I'm connecting with so many ancient cultures who are still doing it. So there's this real sense of feeling connected to the earth. It sounds silly, but I feel one with the clay when I'm working. You know, I'm just totally in the present moment, and that's what I like the most. What I do mostly is smoke firing, where you make a pit. It's a very ancient form of firing. It's one of the most primitive, and you either dig a hole or you make bricks, you know, in whatever shape you want for how large your piece is. Like, I'm always remaking it. And then you put about 3 to 6 inches of sawdust and you light it on fire, and then you put a lid on it. And what that lid does is it creates a reduction atmosphere. It takes out the oxygen. There's always a little oxygen getting in. You really don't have control. You know, like, you've made the piece, you've done everything you can, and then, you know, you sort of give it to the universe and see what happens. I have to really decide what I want to throw. So say I'm throwing bowls, and I'll wedge the clay. That's preparing the clay, getting the air bubbles out of the clay. I'll probably wedge 10 to 20, 25 pieces, usually the night before. So then when I go to my table, it's like a surprise. Someone did that work for me. I think just like being out in nature, I think that's probably where I get my most inspiration. I think being by the water, I grew up by the water, so I was always looking at seagulls, and I always had birds. I had a cockatiel, and I had parrots, and I had a dove Joey for 22 years. So I think I've always had this big connection to birds and water. And I think as the years have gone on, I wasn't really aware of it, but I just see it more and more in my work. I was, I think, 21, and I did a 2-year apprenticeship with a master potter, Mirko Orlandini. My brother was studying medicine. He was at Louvain Medical School, and my parents offered me a trip to go visit him and said, why don't you just use that as a place to stay. He was living on a farm, and my sister-in-law was in advertising, and she didn't have anything to do with ceramics, and she just said, well, I'll find out who are the best potters in Belgium and see if you can work with them. So she just did. And then it was a choice about being with someone who in the city or the country, and I decided to go into the city, to Brussels. It was a really great apprenticeship. It wasn't very typical. More typical is when you do an apprenticeship, you end up doing all the sweeping and stacking of the kiln and cleaning. My experience with him was I had a wheel. He had made his wheels, and there was his wheel and my wheel, and he was right there, and I got to throw like every day from 9 to 6 for 2 years. So it was a pretty amazing opportunity. It was definitely hard. So then I started, and I was making really little birds. And then I started making them about this big, and they were like on these tiny little stands. And then they grew and grew, but this was over about a year or 2 years. The other animal I really do is goats. I just love the bodies of goats, the shapes of goats. And I used to have goats, and so I've spent a lot of time with goats, and I don't have goats now. And you know, my kids are always saying, just stick to the clay ones, Mom. Keep making them bigger and bigger. So I have been making them, you know, a lot bigger. My family and I, we lived for a year in Italy, in Tuscany, and it was a real opportunity to learn about the Etruscans, and we went to lots of museums. I liked their style. Everything was very elongated, but it had a joy to it. I think in that way it just really opened me up. You know, I had such a serious traditional training in Belgium. It was very playful, and I didn't really realize it until a few years later when we came home how it affected my work. I really didn't make that connection. It was probably 6 years later. You know, I just hadn't made that connection of how I brought that into my work. Because when I came back, everyone was very much, oh, I can't wait to see your new work, what it's going to be like. And I felt a lot of pressure, and I kept saying, it could take years for it to come out. Who knows if it will ever affect me? But people were so drawn to the birds, and I sold so many that it made me realize that it wasn't my story. My story didn't mean anything. It was, people were just relating to the birds. Pieces I don't like, I destroy. And I actually really like that. I love throwing it on the cement floor. It makes a good sound. Sometimes I'll just look around in the studio and I'll see all these pieces. You know, I'll see some pieces and I go, I'm fed up with that piece, and then I'll break it and it will feel really good. If I find myself wondering about the piece, like if I say to myself, do I like this? Then the answer is no. Because on a piece that I really like, I never ask myself that. I always just teach at CVU in the evening. It's a really fun class for just people who at some time in their life did clay and they want to get back into clay. So all of them feed me, you know, because I'm always learning from students. And sometimes it energizes me. Sometimes I'll come home after teaching and I'll just go into my studio and maybe work till 12. You know, other times I get up really early in the morning so I can have 2 or 3 hours of good work. And then I feel like, okay, I've done my work. I can do anything during the day now. But that feels good, you know, that I have time of intense teaching and then time off. So I can really do my own work and create new work. When I come down to my studio, no matter how messy the house is or anything going on, I just feel once I'm down here and working, I just feel really connected. I'd say right now I'm really interested in animals. That means something to me. And I still really like throwing. I feel like I have that skill, so it's something that I know I can do, so I still do that. And I feel like my work just keeps growing and changing. And it's a way for me to learn more about myself. And I don't really think about what makes my work unique. I just do my work.